everyone, hope we're feeling okay. You are watching my channel, Boomy Reactions, and I am Boomy. Hello, thank you for watching. So today, guys, I'm going to be catching up on some more American history. So this one is entitled The History of Texas in 11 Minutes. Now, I'm not too sure that kind of history can be explained to an outsider in 11 minutes, but sure, we'll give it a go. Let's see how much of it I actually retain. So, the history of Texas. So Texas is a little bit different from the rest of the other states with your history in particular. I had no idea that Texas was actually part of the Mexican territory. In the like the 1800s? So this is news to me. This is really interesting. So I'm going to delve into this a little bit more today. You have to forgive me. What I have learned in high school of American history is probably nowhere near the extent to which you guys know your country's history for our American viewers. So if I have any very, very ignorant questions and very basic questions, just bear with me. I'm learning. So yes, let's just get on with the video, guys. If you are enjoying these reactions, please like and subscribe to the channel. It's hugely beneficial. And thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your support. And let's watch.
Home of the fastest road in the USA, the largest state capitol building in the nation, and a mass bigger than any country in Europe, Texas has a history almost as large as everything in it. The history of the great state of Texas technically begins at around 9,200 BC at least. Paleo-Indians were the early inhabitants of the territory, and by the first AD years, Texas boasted a considerable indigenous population.
All right, guys, little bit of paleontology aside, what is this animal? I'm clueless. What is this animal? It looks not quite prehistoric because, you know, humans weren't around then. But what is this animal? I've never seen it before. It looks like a kind of aardvark come turtle come rhino thing.
Already. By the time the North American continent began to be colonized, there were about 6 main native cultural groups in Texas alone. This meant that the fate of the early European colonists would depend vastly on how the locals responded to their presence. The first European explorer to map the Texas Gulf Coast was Alonso Alvarez de Pineda in 1519. Although it wouldn't be for nearly another decade until a Spaniard actually journeyed into the North American interior.
So this is a new name to me already. Yes, so I'm just not clued up on this part of history within the USA. So what did they say his name was? So this is the explorer, the Spanish explorer that has mapped out the coast, but he's not going to be the first explorer to venture inland. Okay.
And thus, Texas. This next expedition began in 1528 under the lead of Panfilo de Narvaez, but quickly turned into an utter disaster. Hurricanes and savage storms battered the expedition and sunk 2 of the fleet's ships, killing already a good chunk of the initial 600 men. The survivors were still aimed for a landing in modern-day Tampico, Mexico, but as luck would have it, they were instead blown off course toward Florida, not far off from today's Tampa Bay. Now, Narvaez opted to divide his troops into 2 groups, one on land and one still on the ships, to explore the northern coast of Florida. These expeditions were intended to meet up once more at an unspecified harbor, but yet again, the plan would fail. There was no harbor where the fleet could dock, and the 300 who had traveled by land were under siege from the local indigenous tribes, as well as from starvation and disease. These explorers were dying by the masses now, and only a few months later, around 90 remained. Conditions were no better than thus far, however, and when the final group of explorers were swept onto Galveston Island, they were swiftly abducted by the natives, and more would continue to succumb to disease, starvation, and now the harsh conditions of their new situation.
That is an absolute disaster of a mission, isn't it, guys? Oh my gosh, they're down to 90 men from originally 600. Oof.
Years later, 90 became 4. Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, Andrés Dorantes de Carranza and his slave Estevanico, and Alonso del Castillo Maldonado were the only remaining members of Narvaez's journey. The final survivors attempted on their own to explore what they could of the modern southwestern portion of the United States and the very top of Mexico, but they would soon join ranks with a group of slave catchers they found in Sinaloa in 1536.
So, I forget what year they actually said that this mission embarked and when it began, but this must have taken them a long time. Like, it doesn't look like a massive amount of area on this map, but I've made this mistake before. Like, the USA is gigantic. So realistically, how many miles are we talking about? You know, how many miles have they traveled and explored around this area here just to come back on themselves? And they've done that in what, 10 years? Forget what the original date was.
Finally, the expedition would reach Mexico City, and eventually the few survivors left returned to their Spanish homes.
4 from
The
600.
French, however, were no less interested than Spain. While the Spaniards failed to follow up their early expeditions with the establishment of any real settlements, the French managed to do it without even intending to. It all started in the late 1600s, when a French nobleman by the name of Robert Cavelier de la Salle decided to explore along the Mississippi River with the purpose of finding a way to create a better buffer between France's North American territories and those belonging to Spain. Stumbling across the Gulf of Mexico, La Salle would soon claim the whole of the Mississippi River Valley for France. After returning to France, he then attempted to convince the king to set up a settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi.
I'm going to say that's one of the Louis, that's a King Louis. So this area that they want to claim for France, is that modern day Louisiana? I'm just thinking, is it named after Louis, trying to appease the monarchs as they did in those days? Like, is it William Drake that discovered Virginia and named it Virginia in honor of Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, as they did in those days. I think it it appeased them. It played into their ego to have a big part of land named after them. So is this Louisiana named after King Louis?
To help fend off the nearby Spaniards, in addition to trying to convert more of the indigenous population to French Christianity. When King Louis XIV finally gave his approval, La Salle was sent back to begin the colony. Navigational faults would eventually lead La Salle to instead create a settlement further west off the coast of Mexico, but this colony would scarcely survive 3 years before finally succumbing to incursions from the natives, disease, and other difficulties.
Just like the ones before them from the previous fleet. So what kind of diseases do you think they're succumbing to, guys?
The Spanish would soon hear of the French colony nonetheless, and decided that they should remove this thorn which has been thrust into the heart of America.
Yeah, they're not going to
However,
be too pleased,
the
are they?
Karen-Kawa and disease had already done so for them. Realizing the collapse of France's settlement and the possibilities now to found a Spanish one, Alonso de Leon was sent off to first establish a mission in eastern Texas in 1690. This launched a period of on-off interest in Texas by Spain, as clashes with the natives seemed to continuously dissuade the Spaniards from doing much more. Real efforts appeared to only come in the early 18th century, after a Franciscan missionary attempted to seek support from the French for establishing new missions in Texas. Spain would almost immediately move to reoccupy the territory and keep the French out, which they did fairly well. At least, they were better at defending themselves from the French than from the local indigenous. Though still at odds with various local tribes, in 1762, Spain was finally able to convince the French to relinquish all claims to the Texas territory at the end of the 7 Years' War.
That is a lot of territory which Spain have now claimed. So this is Mexico. This is Mexican territory now. Am I right?
The Mexican War of
Yeah.
Independence would secure much of Spain's former North American colonies as the new state of Mexico in 1821.
Right,
Texas would be part of this infant country, and the Mexican government quickly blasted open the door for immigration as they hoped to bring in more settlers to counteract the effects of the angry natives. But with the
So that speaks volumes, isn't it? They were having such issues trying to fend off the indigenous tribes that they were willing to just open the borders, open the gates to anyone that will come in under the condition that you help, that they helped to defend off from the natives. So they set aside their differences, in order to fight off their enemy of the indigenous tribes. Yeah, no.
growing population also came growing unrest. And by 1836, a new Texas government was formed, and a declaration of independence from Mexico followed. The new Republic of Texas would host the infamous Battle of Alamo in short order, a bloody massacre of Texas defenders that lit a passion under many Texans who were now even more determined to fight the Mexicans. The Texas Revolution subsequently would be successful in the end, although the independence fighters opposing what they saw as the tyrannical rule of Mexico soon voted in favor of becoming a part of the United States.
So, guys, I've got to ask because I've heard of the Alamo. I vaguely know what happened, what went down here. Why is it considered a win for the USA or for the Texans if it was the Mexicans that had won at the Alamo? What's the thing about that? Because my understanding, when we see American TV again growing up, the saying "Remember the Alamo," that to me kind of indicates that it was a Texan or a US win. But is it regarded as a win for Mexico? This confuses me. Is the chant "Remember the Alamo," is that something that is said like, I remember what went down here, you've murdered my brothers, and now you're going to pay? Is that what that saying means? I'm a bit confused.
Ironically, the latter didn't even want Texas at first. Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren shot down the idea initially, but pressure from Great Britain for Texas to remain sovereign frankly pushed the Americans towards annexation. Finally, in 1845, both Congresses approved the move, and Texas thus became a state of the USA. This, not surprisingly, triggered discord between America and Mexico over territorial disputes that would initiate the start of the Mexican-American War. Though, in the end, Mexico would technically receive money in exchange for the full American ownership of Texas as well as other ceded territories, there wasn't much of an option left by the time the war was over. Originally, Texas had actually laid claim to these additional ceded territories, which are now part of modern-day Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. But Texas would eventually relinquish these claims to the federal government with a compromise of 1850, and barely over a decade later, in a drastic turn of events, Texas chose to leave the United States entirely. With the Civil War coming ever closer, a period of panic erupted in Texas, becoming known as the Texas Troubles.
So just quickly, guys, in relation to the the War of Independence, the American Revolution. Where did Texas stand in that war then? Or was it that they were still considered part of the Mexican territories at that point in that war? Because I feel like it's kind of breezed over a little bit and we've jumped straight into the Civil War, where we can see Texas is its own established state. But before then, the American Revolution, we're going back a little bit. And what was Texas's involvement? What was Texas's involvement in the revolution? Help me out, guys. Help me understand. Let me know in the comments.
There had been rumors of enslaved people suddenly starting fires throughout the state, which led to lynching mobs and a heavier push against the abolitionist beliefs of the Union. This would eventually push Texas to hold a vote concerning secession from the United States, which found a whopping 76% of Texans in favor of leaving. As a result, Texas officially seceded and instead decided to join the Confederate States of America, a drastic change from its prior pleas to be annexed. Throughout the war, Texans who even still loosely supported or wished to be part of the Union faced severe consequences for their dissension, particularly those of the German and Mexican districts, and in Cook County in particular. In the latter, over 100 Union supporters were arrested, while over 60 of those were executed. Civil War Texas was plagued with such massacres of Unionists, and even after the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth marks the end of hostilities in one form, it also triggered a new wave of violence and outrage from Confederate veterans. Nevertheless, Texas would officially rejoin the United States of America on March 30th, 1870. The following phase of Texas's history marked a time of difficult reconstruction. Racial divides caused the once 90% black Republican Party in Texas to lose power to the white Democrats. This also coincided with a new movement within the Republican Party that aims to remove the freed slaves from power in the party, with all of this reflecting the overall ongoing racial conflict throughout the former Confederate state. These challenges would stretch into the 20th century as Texas struggled to stabilize itself socially within the Union. Hurricanes, drought, and the JFK assassination would additionally plague the great state of Texas over the next century, making it a tough ride for Texans still.
Okay, very interesting. Guys, as always, I've got questions. So the narrator says there, coming into the 20th century, there was like a civil unrest regarding the JFK assassination. Just explain for an outsider, please. What was the relation of that happening to Texas? How did that impact Texas? I can't make the link. Let me know. Yes, so the history of this state in particular is particularly interesting. There's been a lot of territory war going on. There have been, like the narrator said, many troubles, many different socio-economic maybe problems going on here. So it's very interesting. You do have an entirely different history set aside from the rest of the USA. I've got another question. Is that why you're called the Lone Star State? Is it the separation and not wanting to join the US and not wanting to join the US, wanting to be independent? And explain that for me, somebody. That would be very helpful. Thank you in advance. Let me know in the comments. And so, yes, that was a really interesting video, guys. So thank you for watching that with me. And I'll catch you on the next video. See you later. Bye-bye.